All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to my presentation, everyone. My name is Charlie Sapp. I know I put Charles on there, but usually go by Charlie. I'll answer to both, though. And I am a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. And my presentation today is just about the straight facts about tobacco. So I titled it Everything You Always Want to Know About Tobacco, but We're Afraid to Ask. So we're going to cover a lot in this presentation, but basically what I wanted to do is give a talk about what are the straight facts about tobacco. I mean, there's a lot of things in the media about it, a lot of media representations. There's a lot of things going on around about vapes and about smokeless tobacco. So I just wanted you to have all the facts that you need to make the most informed decision for your health. So that's really what this is about. It's not meant to be any kind of scare tactic or anything like, oh, okay, everybody knows tobacco is probably not the best for you, right? Of course. But I just wanted you to have the best knowledge, most up-to-date knowledge so that you can make an informed decision for yourself and for those around you. So that's what this is all about, okay? All right, so let's get started with the presentation. So I just want to say a little bit about myself first. Let me move this down so that this isn't in your way. So as I said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. And my training is mostly in behavior change. You might have heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. A lot of mindfulness approaches are typically what I find the most helpful in my practice. Before working with the Wellness at Work tobacco treatment program, I was an outpatient therapist in Durham. So that's sort of where my clinical background comes from. And a lot of experience working with substance use, people struggling with substance use, but really anybody who wants to make a change in their life. You know, if that's a behavior, if it's with a substance or something else in their life that's causing them problems. So I take a particular interest in behavior change and helping people figure out how to change those behaviors that are very difficult to find our way around. You know, whether that's with a cigarette or with a drink of alcohol or whatever it may be. So that's a little bit about my work history, but I am from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, born and raised, went to UNC for the school, UNC for my social work degree. And I graduated in 2020, so I've been doing this for about 3 years. And when I'm not doing anything related to social work or counseling, I just like to be outside. You know, as you can see in my picture, I just like to be outside. So I like to go hiking, fishing, gardening, anywhere where I can just be out, in nature, spending time with friends and family too. I thought I'd just include a fun fact. I have a twin brother who lives in Durham. So if you see somebody who looks a lot like me, maybe you walk up to him and say, "Oh, hey, Charlie." It might actually be my brother. So fair warning. All right. So that's a little bit about me. So what are we going to cover today? There's a lot. This is a huge topic. It's way bigger than just the 45 minutes that we have together today. There's so many different types of tobacco products. There's so many different facts that we could go through. So I just wanted to take all of that and see if I could put it in a little package that would just be the most useful information for you to take away from this. So here's what I'd like for us to spend some time on today. So number one, what are the different types of tobacco products? There's a lot of them out there, okay? But we're going to kind of go through them in the different categories of how they're presented, how the manufacturers choose to present them, what are the different types of, as they call them, electronic nicotine delivery products. So like your vapes, um, what are the other kinds of smokeless tobacco, smoked tobacco, combusted tobacco, as they say. And then we're going to move into how are these products addictive? So what is the substance? What is it about nicotine, which is the thing that is in common with all of these different products, is how nicotine is delivered into the body. What is it about nicotine that's so addictive? Why is it so hard to cut and quit when somebody wants to? Even knowing the facts that it's not good for the body, it's not good for your health. Why is it so addictive? So what's going on? We're going to cover a little bit about that in this presentation. And then I'd like to go through number three, what happens when somebody quits? Like what happens in the body? What happens psychologically? What happens physically? What are the benefits of quitting that you would see both in the short term and in the long term? And then I just want to talk a little bit about our program, say a little bit about how it works, what I like to do to make the program as easy and as accessible for you as possible if you choose to reach out or help others to reach out. What does it look like? How can you get in contact with me? And then what would treatment look like? Okay, so that's our plan for today. So then first, I'd like to start with showing this diagram. So what is in a cigarette? I think everybody, I mean, of course, everybody can probably recognize a cigarette when they see one. We've all seen them. They're all over the media. You see people smoke. You've maybe smoked yourself. So they're very recognizable, but I think it's helpful to take a moment and just look at what exactly is in these things. What exactly are we looking at when we look at a cigarette? I think that this could be helpful. So first of all, you have the filter, and the filter is helpful in that it does screen out some harmful chemicals that are cancer-causing chemicals, like heavy metals, and there's over 7,000 of them. There's a ton of them, but there are a lot of chemicals that when you burn tobacco and you burn the paper that the tobacco is wrapped in, that's what you're ingesting into your lungs when you smoke a cigarette. And this filter does take out some of those. So it's designed to trap smoke and stop a small portion of the smoke from being inhaled. So it is helpful to have a filter on it as opposed to a non-filtered cigarette. So then you also have the tipping paper, which they have little ventilation holes, which very often, if they're blocked when someone's holding, because most people hold the cigarette by the end, so they're often blocked, which makes them largely ineffective, just because of their location. But there are those little holes. You can probably recognize them if you look closely at it. And the key thing I kind of want you to take away from this, because there's a lot of information on this diagram as well, is just that when you are inhaling the smoke from a cigarette, there's a lot you're inhaling besides tobacco. So you're inhaling the burned cigarette paper, which of course includes tobacco. You're inhaling a lot of the pesticides, you're inhaling a lot of the chemicals that are added to the tobacco by the manufacturers. Everything is burned, of course, when you smoke a cigarette. So it's not just the tobacco and the nicotine that are entering your system through the lungs, but it's also everything else that goes into the production of the tobacco that's added into there. So a lot of the additives could be ingredients that are more appealing, that make them more appealing, such as menthol. So the flavor of menthol, which can mask the harshness of the nicotine, that's of course in there. There's other additives like sugars that are also contain cancer-causing chemicals when burned. So things like vanilla or cinnamon, not necessarily have cancer-causing chemicals in them, but they are very irritating to the throat when they're combusted and then inhaled. So a lot of other flavors that are added, as you can imagine, you've probably seen these on the market. Used to be clove cigarettes, that were very appealing to many people, a lot of times youth too. Ammonia is another chemical that may be in there, which can be put in as an additive, excuse me. So basically what I want you to take away from this is there's a lot more going on in a cigarette than just meets the eye. It's not just tobacco in paper being inhaled through a filter. There's a lot that when it's combusted is causing harm to the body when it's ingested. Okay. So let's close out of this and go back to our presentation. So that's kind of the first place I'd like to start. Is the tobacco product I think everybody is pretty familiar with is a cigarette. So what is in a cigarette? As we saw, there's a lot of different things going on through that diagram. There's a lot of things going on in a cigarette when you inhale it. So nicotine is absorbed rapidly through the lungs and reaches the brain in seconds. So when you do inhale the smoke from a cigarette, it's absorbed in in the membrane of the lungs, and then it enters the bloodstream instantly and then goes right to the brain. So that's when you get that feeling of that first inhalation. You kind of get that relaxing feeling or the stimulating feeling. That's the nicotine passing the blood-brain barrier and hitting your brain. So this is also another fun fact. One cigarette contains a deadly dose of nicotine. Most of that nicotine, though, is, of course, it leaves when you exhale it, it leaves in the smoke that you exhale. It's coming off the smoke from the cigarette. It's lost in, the air, just the air being blown when you blow it out. It doesn't actually, you don't actually inhale it into your lungs. All that nicotine gets lost in the environment. But it does, the amount of nicotine in the tobacco in a cigarette technically contains a deadly dose. This is why it's really important to keep cigarettes away from children, because if a child eats a cigarette or puts a cigarette in their mouth and, for some reason ingests the nicotine in cigarette, it could be very harmful to the child, if not deadly. So it's very important to keep cigarettes away from children. So again, like I said, the danger is really in the combustion, and there's over 7,000 chemicals and 40 cancer-causing chemicals within a cigarette, and it's when you combust it and inhale it into your lungs, that's really where a lot of the damage is coming from. So, for example, there may be many heavy metals such as cadmium and lead within a cigarette. And so, just to say this one last thing about nicotine, nicotine is an alkaloid. That's the type of chemical it is. So it has a stimulating effect on the body, and that's what makes it addictive, as you can imagine. Now, there's a lot of other tobacco products too out there besides the cigarette, of course. There's smokeless tobacco, which we're going to go over the different types of those. There's dissolvable tobacco products, hookahs, pipes, cigars or cigarillos, which of course very similar to cigarettes. And all of these just have different levels of nicotine. They're all essentially nicotine delivery products, right? It's the thing that is addictive about them is the nicotine. But there's just different ways of course, ingesting them. We're going to go over a couple of them today. So smokeless tobacco, again, there's a ton of these, but this includes chewing tobacco, snuff, orb sticks, strips, snus, betel nut, and tumbak, just to mention a few. And I included this picture. This is a picture from the CDC, and I mean, you can probably imagine there are many, many different brands and different types of these different products, but these are some of the more common smokeless tobacco categories. So you've got loose chewing tobacco. That's the one that comes in the little pouches, and you stick it in your cheek and just suck on it and spit it and chew on it. There's plug chewing tobacco, moist snuff, which is kind of a wet fermented tobacco. And then there's dry snus, which isn't as popular today, but you would inhale it through your nose. And then dry snuff. And then there's snus, which is similar to moist snuff, but it's in little individual pouches. And this is probably a review for many people, but the key here is just that each of these have different amounts of nicotine in them. And so it's very different from a cigarette in that a lot of these contain more nicotine than one individual cigarette does. And it's in your mouth for longer, so the absorption is slower. And as it's absorbed slowly over time, the effect is quite different than a cigarette might be. So here, just to give you an idea of the amount of nicotine, I mean, of course, you don't have to remember this, but it's just to give you an idea of what you're looking at with these different products. So moist snuff could have 4 to 25 milligrams of nicotine in it. Dry snuff could have 11 to 25. Chewing tobacco could have 3 to 40. So you can see there's a huge variation. And of course, it depends entirely on how much individual's using, what type of brand they're using, how frequently they use, that kind of thing. I mean, there's a huge amount of variation, but smokeless tobacco tends to deliver more nicotine to the body than an individual cigarette. There's also a lot of products out there that we'll get into a little bit later too, but they look similar to the snus in that they're in little pouches, or they're maybe almost like a lozenge form, and that these are products like Zen, they're just pure nicotine. There's no tobacco in them at all. And all they're doing is delivering nicotine through the mouth and absorbing through the gums. So I just include those there too, because there's a lot of smokeless products that have no tobacco in them. It's just pure nicotine. There's less concern with combustion, of course. So all those chemicals that may be present in a cigarette that you are also inhaling along with the tobacco. There's less concern with inhaling, those kinds of chemicals into your lungs, but there are some health effects that it'd be helpful for you to be aware of. Okay, so that's kind of a review of smokeless tobacco. So this is just to give you a sense. Let me move my picture here. This is just to give you a sense of how nicotine hits the bloodstream with the different types of tobacco. So for example, a cigarette, you have a quick spike that's almost immediate. And so the smoke enters your lungs, the nicotine is absorbed through the lungs, goes right to the bloodstream, and then the blood takes it straight to the brain. So you see that quick, immediate spike in nicotine and then a gradual decrease. And this is where you might see some of the withdrawal symptoms, which can prompt cravings for nicotine, is over the next hour or so, 2 hours, that nicotine decreases. And then the person just wants to have more. So then that's the desire for the next cigarette. So oral snus, nicotine gum, or chewing tobacco have kind of a different effect. So it's a more gradual build. but as you can see, they deliver more nicotine over time. So these are the two I really want you to take a look at. Is first cigarettes, how there's that quick spike and then a gradual decrease. And then chewing tobacco, where there's not as much of the spike as with cigarettes. It's a slow build over about a 30-minute period. But then that continues to go, as you continue to have that tobacco in your mouth, the absorption just continues to be maintained. So just something to keep in mind, that depending on which type of tobacco you're using, it can have a very different effect. Okay, let's move back up here. All right, so this is the part that's probably not new to everybody, but everyone knows that there's health effects for using tobacco, either smoking or using smokeless tobacco. But I want to just review what the research has shown tobacco impacts as far as physical health. So, of course, cancer throughout the body, not just lungs or in the esophagus or the mouth if you're using smokeless tobacco, but tobacco has been linked to cancer throughout the body and many different forms of cancer. So what happens is the chemicals that are taken in through, the mouth or the lungs, those chemicals and nicotine spread throughout the organs through the blood. So the blood takes all those chemicals and distributes them throughout the body to the different organs of the body. So the use of tobacco is linked with cancer throughout the system. So oral disease is mostly linked with, as you can imagine, smokeless tobacco like chewing tobacco or plugs or snus. They lead to gum disease, leukoplakia, which is kind of a white, flaky area on the gums that can develop with smokeless tobacco use, tooth decay, tooth loss. And this is why many times at the dentist now, you may be asked if you use tobacco products for this reason, just so that they can assess whether what's going on within your mouth could be linked to tobacco use. So you may hear that. Heart disease, of course, tobacco is linked to heart disease. There's very strong evidence that tobacco leads to some form of heart disease. And then immune dysfunction is another one. Inflammation, so this is swelling. Tobacco actually brings the body's ability to protect itself down, which is the reason for immune dysfunction. But nicotine's very irritating. It's irritating in the lungs. It's irritating when it's in the mouth. And so it can just increase inflammation throughout the body as it's absorbed. And this is a whole nother topic. We could probably spend an hour on this, but these days, some surgeons will not even operate on somebody unless they've quit using tobacco, because nicotine and other chemicals within tobacco complicate wound healing after an injury. So it takes more time to heal from a surgery or any injury if someone is using tobacco. And then, of course, there's reproductive and developmental risks. Early delivery, stillbirth has been linked to using tobacco, neurodevelopmental delay if used during pregnancy. And again, this could be a whole other presentation, but I just wanted you to have the over-the-fly overview. Yeah, and this is just a note on smokeless tobacco. It is, because it's not being combusted, there is less harmful chemicals from combustion, but it's not necessarily safer because there is more nicotine, which makes it more addictive. And nicotine, as a byproduct of being digested in the body, the chemicals that are produced when it's digested also have been linked to cancer too. So there are some. You obviously don't want to combust tobacco. It's worse to combust it and inhale it, but there are still some health concerns. So let's go over hookah a little bit. This is a diagram of what it looks like. You've all probably seen hookah before, but I just wanted to show a quick picture. So there's the head, the body, the water bowl down there at the bottom, and then the mouthpiece, and then the hose. And then usually you can have several different hoses because this is more of a social smoking device. So it burns shisha, it's fermented tobacco that's been mixed with sugar and fruity flavors. Sometimes you even see them put it in a fruit head. It's not filtered, so there's no filtering device like on the cigarette. But it is drawn through water, which doesn't filter anything out. I think contrary to a lot of popular belief, it doesn't filter out any of those chemicals that come with combustion. It just makes it feel smoother because it's been mixed with water vapor, and it feels smoother when you inhale it. So it's not filtered. So what you're inhaling is the sugar, the flavor, the tobacco, and then whatever smoke that's coming from the charcoal, which is the combusting agent, what's burning the tobacco. So hookah typically has 100 times the tar of a cigarette, 4 times the nicotine, and 11 times the carbon monoxide. So that's what is being ingested when someone uses a hookah. So it's estimated that, and again, this is an estimate. It varies depending on how you're using it, how many people are smoking it, how much tobacco is in the bowl, how much charcoal, because hookahs themselves will come in many different sizes and shapes. But typically during an hour session of smoking a hookah, you're smoking about 100 cigarettes, the amount of smoke that is in 100 cigarettes. So about 9,000 milliliters of smoke, compared to about 500 to 600 milliliters when smoking a cigarette, just to give you a general broad idea. And then cigars and pipes. This is important. I just want to say from the outset that I'm not talking about, I'm talking about commercial pipes and cigars. So not pipes that are used by America's indigenous peoples. That's actually a totally different plant. So the commercial tobacco companies have their own varieties of tobacco that they use to grow for the most yield, the most nicotine. And these are separate from native varieties that are used from a more ritualistic standpoint, and it's almost a totally different plant. They're different. There's different cultivars, still nicotine and still burned and combusted and inhaled, but there's a different process. There's a different way of living around it. So what I'm talking about today is commercial pipe tobacco or in commercial cigars. So again, produces over 7,000 chemicals when burned, but these are a little bit different because, as you can imagine, a cigarette is inhaled and that's the primary mode of delivery. But cigars and pipes are kind of a mix because the cigar, typically they sit it in their mouth, the nicotine's absorbed through the gums or through the lips. Parts of it are inhaled, but it's typically not, that's not why people use a cigar, is more for the flavor. And so some people do inhale, of course, but it isn't in the same way as a cigarette. So commercial pipe smoking is decreasing in the United States. And this is, oh, excuse me, I got very confused. Oh, sorry. And then cigars and cigarillos have many different brands. Some are wrapped in tobacco leaves. There's many different sizes and flavors. One large cigar has about the same amount of tobacco as a pack of cigarettes. Okay. Okay, so let's turn to e-cigarettes and electronic cigarettes. This is also a big topic. But basically, just to give you an idea of the main components of them, they contain a battery, which is the heating element, and then an e-liquid which is contained within a tank, a reservoir. So it produces what's called aerosol, which contains nicotine and flavorings and other chemicals. So there's, of course, no tobacco in these, but it contains the same chemical, which is nicotine, that makes it addictive, of course. And again, there's many different forms, many different delivery systems. And this is almost more, this is almost more than tobacco products. The market is constantly changing. Every month, it seems like they're coming out with new products. The market's constantly evolving. They're coming up with different ways of marketing these products to young people, to people who are trying to quit using tobacco or moderate their tobacco use. So there's a lot going on in this market that we could cover today. But I do just want to get into what are the different types that you may see out there and what are the health risks associated with them. So this is just a general overview. There are e-pipes now and e-cigars, which look very much like cigars and pipes. There's large tank devices, which are rechargeable or they run on a battery. And the individual can, you can change up the liquid, the amount of liquid, the composition of the liquid, the battery power charge to change the amount of smoke you get, the amount of nicotine you get. And then there's ways of hiding them so they look like pins, vape pins, making them a little bit more discreet. And then this is you may recognize this. This is Juul. So I believe Juul is disposable. Some of them are disposable and some of them are rechargeable. And then there's disposable e-cigarettes, which are just one-time use or one session use. So there's all kinds of different ways of viewing these. So again, this is just a broad overview too of the different generations of these products. So there's the first generation, which is disposable e-cigarettes, where it's like one-time use, almost like a cigarette. You use it and then you throw it away. And the second generation is e-cigarettes with pre-filled or refillable cartridges, so they can be reused many times over. And then the third is tanks or mods. These are the more customizable options where people can get into the weeds about, how much voltage do you want? How much nicotine do you want? Do you want nicotine at all? Is it more for flavor? Is there THC in it, which is the active chemical in one of the active chemicals in marijuana? And then you have the fourth generation, which is way more common now. Pod mods like Juul. Um, you may have seen the other one. I'm trying to think of the names off the top of my head, but Juul is the big one that are pre-filled or refillable, and they can be recharged too. And these are very discreet. I mean, a lot of them look like pens, or they look like just basic household, like school supplies products. Actually, I mean, I think I've even seen whiteout that looks like one of these, the little whiteout tapes. So just ways that people can be very discreet about using them. And these are, they're all of them have different components, but these are the main components: the battery, the sensors, the atomizer, and then the cartridge. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but it's just to give you a sense of what the basic makeup of vapes are. So what's in that aerosol we talked about? So it, of course, contains nicotine, which can vary from 1.2 to about 5%. And this is also depends on how someone chooses the makeup of the e-liquid. So it can have way more than this, it can have less than this, but this is typically what you'll find in a lot of the pre-filled products. It also contains a lot of particles and compounds that are inhaled into the lungs. A lot of these, which there's still a lot of research being done about what the health impacts of these compounds are, but many of them can be very irritating, such as the flavorings, which are also linked to serious lung disease, like cinnamon and vanilla. So you may have heard of EVALI, which is the lung condition, the irritating lung condition that has been linked to e-cigarettes in recent years, and that's due to these chemicals, these sort of inactive chemicals of the aerosol. So then there's also, a lot of them contain components, volatile organic compounds. So propylene glycol is in a lot of these e-liquid products, which is also used in ice cream, liquid sweeteners, sodas. It's like a binding agent. And then there's vegetable glycerin, which can also be found in laxatives, cough syrup, toothpaste, lotion. So you can imagine these are not chemicals that are necessarily meant to be heated, superheated, and then inhaled. So there's just a lot of questions about what are the long-term health effects of these kinds of chemicals being burned along with tobacco, these binding agents. What's going on when this is what are the long-term effects of this being in the body? There's also can be some cancer-causing chemicals like heavy metals, nickel, tin, and lead, just depending on the makeup of the different products. And this is, of course, there's even more questions if someone's making their own e-liquid and putting it in their own mod. There's just a lot of variables that make it make it hard to predict what the health outcomes might be. So what are those health effects? And what are the health effects of e-cigarettes? Well, as I said, evidence is still evolving. This is a huge market. There's all kinds of different products on the market, but here's what we do know about the health effects of these products. They do contain nicotine, so they are addictive. There is the element of you have nicotine delivered into the bloodstream, and then that slow release of nicotine, and that spike, that pleasurable spike, is what it makes the brain want more of the chemical, and that's what's addictive about these products, is that nicotine. It's again, there's the same issues that come with smokeless tobacco and smoked tobacco. Because they all contain nicotine, they can be toxic to developing fetuses. They can have an impact on adolescent brain development, attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. Especially because, as we know now, the brain is still maturing even into the early 20s, even as far as 26. So if someone starts using any substance, but also tobacco or nicotine products, it can have an impact on how the brain matures, both behaviorally and physically. And then again, can be cancer-causing chemicals and heavy metals. So are e-cigarettes less harmful than regular cigarettes? This is a question I get very often. And the answer is yes, and they don't contain the 7,000 chemicals in smoke from regular cigarettes, cigars, or pipes. They don't contain those chemicals, but they do contain other potentially harmful substances. And there's just a lot of question marks as to what are the impacts of those substances. So what sometimes we say to people is, if we wouldn't recommend anybody picking up a vape and using it from using nothing. If they don't use any kind of smokable nicotine or any kind of nicotine product, it's best not to pick them up at all. But if someone is smoking cigarettes, it's better than smoking. It is better in general than smoking cigarettes, but there still are a lot of health concerns. We don't really have answers to what are the health impacts of using these products. So just a lot of question marks. Another question I get a lot is, can e-cigarettes help adults quit smoking cigarettes? So e-cigarettes are not approved by the FDA as a smoking aid. So they're not approved in the same way that nicotine patches, nicotine gum, nicotine lozenges, which are approved by the FDA as a smoking aid. Those are also nicotine-containing products. But they have been approved as cessation aids, and e-cigarettes still have not been approved as cessation aids. There just isn't enough scientific evidence to approve them as a smoking aid. There are some countries, like I know the UK uses them as a harm reduction device. So they would recommend people using e-cigarettes only in order to bring down their cigarette or smokable tobacco use. But again, there hasn't been a lot of evidence about the efficacy of that. But here in the United States, the FDA has not approved them as a smoking aid, approved vapes as a smoking aid. There's concerns about nicotine dependence because, again, they still contain nicotine, the addictive chemical in tobacco. So there is that risk of addiction, even though they're not inhaling cigarette smoke or tobacco smoke, there is still the risk of addiction. And then there's just a lot of concerns around dual use. So what we have found is that people don't necessarily stop using cigarettes when they use e-cigarettes. They use them at the same time concurrently with tobacco products. So some studies have even shown that people who start using a vape, typically younger people who start using a vape for the flavors and the appeal of it, can sometimes bridge the gap into using tobacco products, combustible tobacco products. So there's even a harm of it being an entryway into using tobacco rather than a replacement or harm reduction. So again, there's just a lot more research to be done, a lot more questions to be answered. But as of right now, that has not been approved by the FDA as a smoking aid. And then again, there's concerns around advertising to young people in the same way that cigarettes in the 1970s and 60s were advertised to young people. The tobacco companies are targeting younger people with advertising vapes and electronic nicotine delivery systems. So here's just an example. I mean, this marketing's pretty great, right? I mean, just to be honest, look at it. I mean, it makes it look very appealing. The different flavors, it's exciting, it draws your eye, and this is just one example. So let's talk for a little bit. We've talked a lot about the different products, some of the dangers and health concerns, but like, what exactly is it about nicotine that is addictive? So smoking a cigarette, peak nicotine concentration happens within 10 minutes. So it's very fast. And then after you smoke a cigarette, the nicotine starts to go down. The amount of nicotine, the body starts to dissolve it. It starts to digest it, and then it hits the brain, and then it moves through the body. So after about, again, those 10 minutes, the blood nicotine level declines to about half what it was. And it continues to decline as it moves through the body. But with smokeless tobacco, this decline is a lot slower, and the delivery of nicotine is a lot more gradual. So after about 5 minutes after consumption of a cigarette, you inhale a cigarette. After about 5 minutes, the nicotine level is at its highest level, and then it goes to nearly nothing in about 30 minutes. So that's a pretty short span of time. You have about 5 minutes peak nicotine, and then after 30 minutes, the nicotine's moved through the body. And this quick hit to the brain, the relaxing feeling, the stimulating feeling, that rapid route to the brain causes it causes an instant release of dopamine, a lot of dopamine. And all of us are experiencing hits of dopamine every day. Dopamine is one of the chemicals that's associated with pleasure. So even when you have your cup of coffee in the morning, or you watch a funny video, or you see someone that you care about, or a friend or family member that you love, that's causing dopamine to happen in your brain. It's a motivating chemical. It's one of the chemicals associated with motivation because we go after the things that we like. And nicotine is similar in that it causes this spike in dopamine, and that makes the person who's using it want to continue to go back to it to get that same release. So the brain is ready for more nicotine very quickly. It's highly reinforcing. I mean, anytime you do something that's pleasurable, you typically want to do it again because you've been rewarded for going towards that thing or doing that behavior. So sometimes I like to use coffee as an example because it's another chemical. Caffeine is another chemical that also causes that energizing feeling. And there's this rush of the chemical to the brain, dopamine's released, and it's reinforcing. It's similar. And then nicotine is broken down in the liver and then exits through the urine. So there are tests actually that you can do, urine tests to see if someone's still using tobacco, because nicotine, as it's broken down, it releases chemicals that can tell you the level of nicotine that the person's been using. So psychologically, the addictive process is known as reinforcement, tolerance, and withdrawal. These are the three categories of addiction. And this is with any substance. So coffee to cocaine, they all kind of run through the same progression. So first you have reinforcement. And I like to use this example with reinforcement, as many of you may have seen the old camel commercials. I'd walk a mile for a camel. I mean, I wouldn't walk a mile for a lot of things. I'm not going to walk a mile for asparagus. I'm not going to walk a mile for, I don't actually mind asparagus that much, but I'm not going to walk a mile for it. But it's so pleasurable, and it's something that you want so badly that you're willing to do a lot of things to get it. You're willing to do a lot of things for a cigarette. You're willing to do a lot of things for coffee. You're willing to do a lot of things, tolerate a lot of things, adverse health effects, people complaining, you knowing that it's not the best for you because of what it's giving you, that rush of dopamine. So dopamine creates that calming, pleasant effect. That's when many people I talk to who say what they like about using tobacco is that it's relaxing. I mean, it's a way for them to calm down, to relax and stress. That's dopamine at work. That's dopamine giving somebody that release of, okay, finally, I can just relax for a minute. Which is odd because nicotine's actually a stimulant. So it's the chemical composition of nicotine is stimulating the body, but it also, because of the dopamine, is giving you that relaxing effect. It can be similar to a cup of coffee in some ways. Tolerance is the next thing with addiction. So tolerance, many people can understand, is that it's the more you use a substance, the more likely you are to want that substance. And that spike in nicotine keeps coming down. So you need to smoke more to get the same feeling that you initially got. And this is kind of where people talk about the first cigarette being the best cigarette of the day, because that's that first spike. They've gone through withdrawal all night, and then the first cigarette is, wow, that's the best cigarette of the day, or that's the best cup of coffee of the day. It's that first one, because you're getting that first initial hit after that long period without it. So tolerance can develop pretty quickly. If there are a group of smokers that have been given 2 doses of nicotine 60 minutes apart, oh, I'm sorry, I actually don't really remember what this was about. I have to ignore that. I forgot what that study was about. I noted that for a specific study, but I don't remember what exactly it was about. But tolerance can develop quickly, and it develops over time, but it can happen within a week. You can have very high tolerance to any substance, but tobacco especially, you can develop that tolerance very quickly. Withdrawal is the last thing that is this aspect of addiction. So withdrawal is just the absence of the substance. So when the substance is not in the body, it can create all kinds of side effects, like which is the craving for the cigarette, irritability, a higher stress response, just restlessness, agitation, And this is, again, why the first cigarette of the day is typically the best cigarette of the day, because you've gone through this long period of time where you haven't had the substance, and then all of a sudden you're getting that relief of, oh, okay, here it is again. It's because of the withdrawal. You're stopping the withdrawal, and that's why it's the most pleasant. So every tobacco user is going through a mini withdrawal every night, and it's breaking of that mini withdrawal in the morning that makes that cigarette so satisfying. So what else is addictive about nicotine? These are the subjective effects. So it's kind of that, it's like a lot of other things that we do throughout our day that give us comfort, like talking to a friend or taking a walk, or whatever routines you have that you go throughout your day. Many people have routines that help them bring their stress levels down or give them a sense of peace. And this is a lot of what's happening with any kind of nicotine or tobacco use, is that there's this ritual hand to mouth pattern. It's very calming. One example I like to use is food service workers. Sometimes, if you're working in a kitchen or you're working in a catering job, you don't have a lot of time, and your job is one thing after the other. There's always something to do, and having a break, taking a cigarette break is the one way to get away from that. Have a few moments to relax yourself, de-stress. So there's a lot of these behavioral things, not the chemical aspect of nicotine, but there's a lot of behavioral reasons why it can be addictive too, because it's a break, it's a routine, it's comforting. Which is what makes it difficult to determine sometimes what are the effects from nicotine alone, or what are the psychological effects of just the dopamine release of, oh, okay, I have my break, or this is my cigarette. I can just relax and de-stress a little bit, take a break. Which one is the chemical nicotine, and which one is just the dopamine release of taking the break? So this is why a lot of people say there's a calming effect to nicotine, and it's even though nicotine itself is a stimulant. It's the same reason. It's a similar reason why coffee is also calming. Some people say having my coffee break is calming. Well, caffeine is a stimulant, but it's also very calming because it's taking that ritual and that routine, and it's a way to take a break. There's a loss of appetite because it's a stimulant, which is one of the physical effects. Nicotine can also lead to taste bud function reduction. So many people talk about when they quit smoking cigarettes, they can taste better or they can smell better. And that's because that taste bud function is coming back. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about what exactly happens when someone quits using tobacco products. And I think this, of course, everyone probably knows long term, all of those health effects that we mentioned earlier, the risks go down for having those health effects. But it's also important to talk about what is happening immediately after someone quits using tobacco products. Inflammation immediately goes down, breathing rapidly improves, and this is within a number of days to weeks. This is very quickly. Lung function increases. Lung function decreases in a similar trajectory to non-smokers. So all of us, our lung function as we age is slowly declining. Even someone who's never touched cigarettes, never been around secondhand smoke, all of our lung function slowly decreases over time. But if someone stops using inhaled tobacco products, their lung function decrease is at a similar trajectory to non-smokers. So that's it. They tend to level out into somebody who's never smoked in their life. The decrease does. It can add as much as a decade to life expectancy, and then lowers the risk of cancer, as you can imagine. And also the risk of stroke returns to the level of a non-smoker, or close to the level of a non-smoker. And this is what I was talking about earlier. It's actually better. It's a little bit easier to understand if you have a graph in front of you, but it's this bump right here. This is the decrease in lung function of a smoker. This is a severely susceptible smoker. And then this is maybe a moderate smoker. And then this is a non-smoker. So what happens when someone stops smoking, they get this bump in lung function. And as you can see, the trajectory starts to look more like someone who is your average non-smoker. So there's this rapid increase in lung function, followed by the normal decrease that you would see in a non-smoker. All right, so we've covered a lot of things today, and I know that if this was live, we would be able to ask questions and talk a little bit more, jump into a little bit more of these, but we don't have question time here. But if you'd ever like to ask any questions of me, I would highly encourage you to reach out. I'm available. I have my phone number down there, 919-923-3774. I'd love to talk more about any of the topics we've covered today. But I just wanted to wrap up by going over what does the Wellness at Work program look like? I'll move this over here so you can see it. The Wellness at Work tobacco treatment program look like. So what would happen is you'd give me a call, you can email me, you can reach out to me over my chart if you have my chart, and we would just talk at first for 20 to 30 minutes, however long you have, come up with a treatment plan. What works for you, what doesn't work for you. We can talk about medications if that's something you're interested in. If not, that's totally fine too. I do my best to make it as accessible as possible to everyone and as useful as possible to everyone. So I don't want it to be something that's a burden or it feels like I just don't have the time for this. So, but there is regular follow-up, and that can be weekly, it can be every 2 weeks, just whatever's useful for you. Medications are free. So some of the things that I mentioned, such as the patch or the gum, the nicotine lozenges, those are all free medications that are provided by the program. And we would talk about options moving forward. What would be the most helpful for you? What you've used in the past? What you don't like to use? What you do? What you're interested in? And then at 6 months tobacco free, you get a $100 gift card, and then at 12 months tobacco free, you get another $100 gift card. So it's just another incentive to not use any tobacco products at all. And then you would just tell me, you'd be in touch with me about it, and we would talk about it, and then you get your $100 gift card from me. So to enroll, you can log into the portal on the Wellness at Work website and select tobacco use assessment from the left side menu bar. Or you can, if you don't have internet access, you can just give me a call and I'd be happy to talk to you. And this number is also one you can text if that's easier to get in touch with me by text, you can absolutely text this number, okay? All right. Well, this would be the time when I'd ask for questions, but hopefully you do have some questions and maybe you'd reach out to me to get some answers to those. But I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this talk. I hope it's been helpful. I hope you can take something away and that you learned something from it. But in any case, I hope to talk to you all soon. Looking forward to meeting you all, and thank you very much.